Check, check.
And so Scott's going to be in this area here.
Yeah.
And you're in that red zone.
Yeah.
With the devastation of speakers.
Okay. Good.
Check, check. Good morning. Come on in, find a seat. As always, there's plenty right up front. My watch says it's 10 past 9, and I looked at my computer and wondered what was wrong, that it said it was 9:18. So, pardon me. I know we've got some folks downstairs eating who had no idea if anybody would come this morning at 9:15, but glad a few of you are here. And I hope there's some folks elsewhere. We didn't know we could do this both in person and online, but this is our first try. This is our first forum in a long, long time, actually. Before we start, or as we start, I wanted to make a couple of plugs. What's coming up in our forums. Next Sunday, it's going to be Linda Dowdy, A New Normal, Spiritual Growth in Uncertain Times. Linda is a spiritual director here in Memphis and actually oversees a lot of spiritual direction. She's kind of a way into spiritual direction in Memphis if you're looking for a spiritual director. And then after Labor Day, we have a full slate of things starting up both on Sundays and Wednesdays. A couple of Wednesday night series that are starting. Paul is going to start one called Call It Grace, Finding Meaning in a Fractured World. That's a book by Serene Jones, who's going to be a Lenten preacher next spring. And then at the same time, Ardell and I are doing something called Vocations, Callings, and Careers, a 5-week series. That started with a conversation with a 30-something young man about how the church talks about vocation versus just career. He was curious about that language. And so we are not limiting to any demographic, but we started with some folks in his and said, let's see if we can get a few people who'd be curious about that. So welcome to join us on Wednesday nights at 6:30 after Labor Day. That's when the full slate of offerings shows up. And soon, Robin has a beautiful chronicle in process. You should get it in your email this week, and paper copy maybe by the end of the week, but maybe next week. And it's got everything that we could possibly put in between the two covers as to what's going on at Calvary, from outreach opportunities to music to formation to worship, all of those things. So that'll give you the full picture of what's coming up. I also wanted to, as we start, just make sure that we celebrated a few newish faces at Calvary. Ted, Kate, you're welcome. You're welcome. Come on up here, Bob. Dr. Brian Campbell is our new assistant organist choir master. Brian Campbell comes to us from St. John's. He's an aviator who was ready to go from a full-time position to a half-time position, which was right when Kristen needed that person. Splendid addition to our staff. Monica Marshall is our sexton. Did y'all ever hear those John Malmo NPR where he has these little rants? There's usually a rant. One of them, he said, when you need to hire the person when they come to you. Like if the right person comes in, you find a way to hire. I want to say Monica is one of those people. She was working as a security guard with us early in the mornings, and everybody said she had this brilliance about her. She could, the way she met people, the way she was gracious in her welcome, and she could do about 11 different things. So we put together, when she was ready for a move to Calvary, a position that involved a lot of different things, caring for our building. But Monica's going to be the person, if we have events, who can tend to the whole evening for us. Open, welcome, set up, close. She's just a beautiful person. Mary Honey, Mary Never Contrary is what I call her when I walk in. She is the face of Calvary for a lot of people at our information desk. She's just a delight to have here during the week. A lot of you know Mary as a parishioner. And Jeremy Demarest, our new Children and Family Ministries Director, coming to us from Texas. He's hit the ground running, and a hilarious joy to be around. So just wanted to highlight those faces for you before we move into a conversation about welcome. And I want to begin with a prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Dear God, you alone know the loneliness and thus the terror of our lives. Indeed, you know us better than we can know ourselves. Give us your knowledge of us so that we might not be so alone. Be with those who seem simply lost, abandoned, alienated from friends and from you. Heal us with your unrelenting hospitality so that we are capable of breaking through the splendid isolation we create, which we call freedom and power. Help us to be touched and to be able to touch without violence. We know that that is possible only because you've touched us with the body and blood of your Son. Thank you for that. Amen. That's a prayer of Stanley Hauerwas, a little book I turn to often. So when we moved into this fall, there comes Heidi right on cue. Heidi Repke stepped up. She's our Lenten preaching coordinator. And when Amber moved on, we knew we had to plan for formation for the fall. She pulled together a brilliant group of people to plan for these fall forums. And they said, why don't you kick it off with a conversation about welcome? We're all coming to Calvary after a very strange time. And something that was identified among the vestry was that we're in a moment where no one's being welcomed back to something that is as it was. There's a sense in you may have been generationally at Calvary, but you're actually not getting to come back and have this same experience. And so, or you may have just walked in the doors today for the first time. And so it's been interesting for the vestry to kind of take on this discipline of talking about welcoming to Calvary and realizing that we're going to have to meet every person in some sense where they are and not assume that just because they're here like Madge every time the door is open, that they're actually returning to something that was. And it kind of opened up that conversation. And so they asked me if we'd have a conversation about it. So it's been a long time since we've done a forum. Quickly, so I was trying to think how I do these. Then I remembered I didn't know how to do them before the pandemic, and so that kind of took the pressure off. But there are at least two models for these things. This is one. I don't recommend it. This is kind of the feeding the birds. There's a lot of, I don't like worms. That's one reason I don't recommend it. I also can't carry much nutrition all on my own. So I wouldn't feed a very big flock if what you're depending on today is just dumping nutrition into your open beaks. I'm looking for something a little more collaborative. So we're going to talk about welcome in a few ways that relate to the Christian tradition, but I want it to be a bit of a conversation here among tables and folks in the room, and then those of you on live stream. I hope there are a few of you out there. Robin is following along on Facebook and YouTube, so if you type in the comments, you can participate in this. Again, this is our first try at doing two things at once in this way, so bear with us and maybe give us some tips afterwards on what worked and what would be helpful. So what is welcome? I want to start with a story that probably won't surprise you. It's not really about COVID. It's not really about welcome. It's one of those wacky stories that I decide I want to tell you about, and then I'll figure out if we can find a lesson from it, right? It's kind of my MO. In 2012, a farmer in Finland in the east of England was digging in his field, and he ran into something. He kept digging, and what he unearthed was a huge, partially fossilized black oak. It's 40 feet long, and the black oak in the UK are very rare, very rare. What happened apparently is 4,000 years ago, this enormous chunk of lumber, probably a limb, there aren't any limbs coming off of it, fell, and it fell with such force it crashed everything in its way and sunk into the peat, basically burying itself where there was no air, which preserved it for 4,000 years. It was probably 800 years when it dropped. So the farmer found it, they pulled it out, they found some experts to just assess what it was, what they might do with it, and they actually buried it because black oak doesn't perform very well if you just bring it up and leave it exposed to the elements. So they pulled it out, they actually put it back in the ground for a while before they decided what to do with it, and then pulled it back out again. They sawed it into 10 planks, 40 feet long, and then they started drying it. You can imagine it's been in a peat bog. This is, for 4,000 years, it soaked up a little bit of moisture. That's a problem for lumber. They dried it for 9 months in this kiln that they built with 3 dehumidifiers, took 397 gallons of water out of that lumber. The planks shrunk by more than a third of their width, and by of their thickness and a quarter of their width. So that's how much moisture was in there. But they stayed flat and true. Really remarkable, right? So they found this, they had these 10 planks. They decided to make a table, a 40-foot table for the nation. Now, in the process, they decided that, what do you do with a tree like this? You don't just chop it up into nice, tidy squares. Everything in you wants to preserve something of the story of a tree like this. All of the power of the table is going to be out of that story. So see all those, we call those live edges. You can tell the tree was just sawn right down through it. Well, they decided when they were going to make the top, they would make something called the river joint, basically preserving all of the edges that they could so that the story of the actual tree is reflected in the surface of the table. There they are. That's the table itself, the top put together. They're going to put it on some bronze pedestals, and its first home for 18 months is going to be in Ely Cathedral. Giant ornate room with this ancient oak table. So, as you can tell, I'm fascinated by this table. I'm fascinated by the process. I'm fascinated by the tree. It's also true that a table is just archetypal when it comes to welcome. Right? There's an old spiritual, I'm going to sit at the welcome table one of these days. Banquet table is an image in the Revelation to John and in all kinds of places in Scriptures. Having a place at a table, even those hard parables where we're not sure we're going to get a place at the table or someone's excluded from their place or they're vying, even that pettiness, I think it suggests that there's something about a table and whether I find welcome there that's essential to figuring out who I am. Even when I act out and I say, I want the best place, Jesus, I think that attests to something in us that says we find out who we are at these tables, whether it's literal or metaphorical. So I want you to hold that in mind, and the different components of this table as kind of a metaphor or an instance that we can reflect on with regard to welcome. But the second thing I think about are monastic communities. Monastic communities are places that are dedicated to a life of welcome, right? It's deeply embedded into the way they shape their lives. Going back to St. Benedict, this is from the Rule of St. Benedict from the 6th century. 6th century? Yeah. All guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ, for he himself will say, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. The Rule of St. Benedict, chapter 53. A couple of things to say about that before we explore. One is it's chapter 53. When I read that passage from Matthew 25, it can be very legalistic, right? The stranger's going to show up, welcome the stranger, or you miss Jesus and you're getting in trouble if you don't. It's kind of a harsh passage, like as if that's how welcome happens. This is chapter 53 for the Benedictines. There's a whole precedent, there's a whole life that they are putting together that will, hope, God willing, prepare them for the moment when the moment of welcome is to happen. And I think we can learn from that. To be a community of welcome is not just to do the right thing in the moment, but it's to actually shape our common life in practices that will lead to this openness, this welcome, this invitation, as if everyone we encounter is Jesus. And again, that includes those among us and those we've never seen before. How do we prepare this space for welcome? Can we learn something from the monastic communities? So in the Benedictine community, there's kind of a three-legged stool. They don't talk about the three-legged stool in this way as a three-legged stool, but there are three things. One way of talking about Benedictine spirituality: stability, obedience, and conversion. They believe that a life together in community that involves these three things leads to a flourishing Christian community. Now, we can talk about what they mean by these, but one thing to say is that they don't believe it's a linear process, that you start with stability, or you start with obedience maybe, and that makes you stable, and then God comes in and converts you. It could be very disruptive. St. Paul got knocked from his horse on his way to Damascus, right? And then he got up and he was obedient to a different way. So they don't believe that you necessarily just get on one point and follow it to the end. It's a constant process. And conversion happens over and over again in our lives. So let's talk a little bit about these, and then I want you to, this is where I want to stop talking and I want to mine your experiences. If we think of ourselves as a Christian community that could learn actually from an ancient way of the Benedictines, what would it look like to reflect on these practices? So my thought, stability, if we want to use our tree, this is kind of that 4,000 years in the peat. A lot of time, experience, what it took on. It's also probably extracting the water that was built up over that time that wasn't the essence of the tree. Stability is a term that people who work with lumber like to use. A stable piece of lumber is one that doesn't warp with the seasons, it doesn't move, it's got this groundedness and this stability. Patina, the color that it takes, the color of time, kind of. Some things only take on a certain color as they've just been for a while. So stability in the monastic practice are those things that we stay over and over again. We do these things, we participate in these ways, and it lends a certain kind of strength to the community that can't be just mustered up. So, a question, and I want you all to talk about it and then share it. I wonder what forms of stability or sustaining practices in your life and in Calvary's have you come to see as necessary after the past year and a half? What forms of stability or sustaining practices in your life and in Calvary's have you come to see as necessary after the past year and a half? Take a minute. I put notes paper if you want it on there. Take a minute. Think about that. Maybe I'll give you 3 minutes for your table if you want to, if it's helpful to talk back and forth. Or we'll see how it works first at your tables, and then if we're few enough for the next one, we'll do it together. Does that make sense? Does the question make sense to you? You don't have to, it doesn't have to be overly spiritualized. It could be something quite simple that you realized has led some necessary stability to your life. Same at home, folks. Those of you who are, please type your thoughts into the comment section and have the same conversation at home.
Couple occasions we had athletic shell.
Mm-hmm.
So not just about everybody, but a lot of people. The availability of the morning officers and Compline.
Good. Let me get a couple others. That's just want to get a few from each table, so we'll keep. That's excellent. What did y'all have? He said morning office and Compline, and those were as well.
Every Thursday, the Baguette brothers, our Calvary Bible study group, met on Zoom for interesting that, to me, that the number of participants actually increased.
The Baguette brothers who started at La Baguette went online and actually added members to that stability that's been 30 years long for the Baguette brothers.
So,
it's a great example.
The comment was made so oftentimes how what a spiritual experience it has been and continues to be for this particular group. And
Sure.
Of course, all men are welcome to join, and we're now meeting at the bathhouse, but it has been a very stable kind of venture for us over this past 12 to 18 months.
So now Baguette's at the Barth House, and that's what Whit's saying. So deep form of stability, regular participation in one another's lives. Do y'all have any to add?
So I came at this a little bit differently, thinking about kind of what has been a stabilizing force in my spiritual life that I wasn't able to do in the last year and a half. And
Yeah.
how I've enjoyed being able to come back to that, and that is singing. And so singing and hymn singing, growing up in the Methodist church,
Yeah.
being in church, being in Bible school, Sunday school, choirs over the years, that was always a big part of my spiritual life. And then all of a sudden not being able to do that
Yeah.
was really hard. And so I was explaining how one of the greatest Sundays I think we've experienced in the last year and a half was when we were able to sing hymns again.
Yeah.
Just because that's been such a stabilizing force in my spiritual life for my entire life.
So this is the other Tim saying the absence of a practice that I realized was so essential to the stability of singing. We stopped singing, and I think that's something that the pandemic has exposed is things that I think a lot of people in a very pragmatic society would think that singing is like a nice addition to life rather than a core. Where are there cultures where people don't sing? Ever. There aren't. So Pat kept singing. Yeah. That's a great one. Y'all have some that haven't been mentioned? Or in either table back there?
We have a few online comments about morning prayer, connections through virtual options, early morning prayer, staying connected with live worship and classes online, and dedicated time with family, staying in touch with long-term friends who are far away,
Yeah.
making dedicated times for rest and quiet.
So some online comments. Y'all can see them online, I think, and we could hear them here. A lot of the daily office and ways of staying connected in new ways to people. Yeah, absolutely. Stability.
We also had the online prayers, but also the personal prayer space at our table. A couple of people.
Personal prayer space in your life for personal prayer? Daily personal prayer. A lot of people, whether it's online or not, have reconnected or connected for the first time to the genius of the daily office, which really is, in our tradition, the monastic tradition brought out into the life of the whole church and reimagined made available to all of us. Well, that's not all of them, but let's think about this other one. Obedience. That's probably not the most popular one initially. That obedience, we're Americans. I don't know. But there's something in the monastic tradition that says for flourishing, there has to be an element that we have decided to forgo some freedom, to bind ourselves to a rule or to other people in a particular way, that this is absolutely necessary for a flourishing human life. It's not just waking up and deciding what I feel like today. So I wonder if there are promises, commitments, resolutions, other non-negotiables that have proven essential for you and for Calvary in the past year and a half. And I want to be mindful of our time. I think we're okay. We can take a few minutes again. And again, think of it both ways like Tim did. Maybe one that you thought was non-negotiable and got ripped away from you and you realized, I need that. So are there promises, essential commitments that have been essential for you? Think personally and think as well as Calvary. It's a little trickier one, where I don't think we go there as naturally. All right, see what you come up with. We'll take another 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll report back. Take another minute and then we'll share out. I could use this, but it probably doesn't need to, you think? I said I could pass that. Let's see what you came up with. I forgot to tie it back to the tree and the table, but my idea of obedience was the way that the folks who were building the table committed to preserving the form. They weren't free to just go off and create a shape all their own, but there's actually something involved in the integrity of the tree itself. So that was the metaphorical, if you like that. If you go that, let's go the other direction. Let's start back in the back. You have one or two that stuck out for y'all?
One was the commitment to doing church at Calvary, but that's staying. That movement needs to not do that at all.
The commitment to doing church at Calvary, just deciding I'm going to do that and participate in the ways I can.
As individuals and as a community, we're going to keep doing this even if it's clunky and different.
Even if it's clunky and different, we had to reimagine what church felt like and looked like, and we didn't. Yes.
But it was the real thing.
But what's that?
It was the real thing.
But it was really church.
They weren't playing church.
It was really church, yes.
And Calvary made the commitment to do that. Many times.
And we commit, that's helpful, Cap. So as a church, we committed to, we have to continue to worship and pray and sing as soon as we can. That's helpful. Those are promises. And it's clunky this morning, I'm sure. What about y'all? Yeah.
Well, we had to make that work. We had to commit to the mask. We had to commit to
Masks.
distancing and
Distance.
commit to the vaccine. So that's kind of
That's helpful, Terry. To root. So it was a spiritual practice to say, we're going to listen to what we're hearing from our scientists. We're going to listen to the group here, and we're going to be bound by those. We're going to bind ourselves to some people outside ourselves. I was very grateful to be bound to Henry Sullivan and other folks in that group to say, don't worry, your rector's not going to be making this up. We're going to have people actually know what they're talking about. That's an excellent one. Did y'all have one to add?
I have something there.
Michael?
I read this thing that Britain thought that Biden was doing a terrible job. And I went, wait. It's all from part of perspective. Is Britain in the right place now?
Well, let's tie this into, we have a really focused topic here. I don't know about Britain right now. I don't know about Britain.
I don't know about most of the world right now.
What about this practice of obedience? Anything you have one that jumped out for y'all?
Well, I think I put two out here. One
Sure.
at the beginning was the collaboration folks did. And obviously the one that jumps out is the lessons of carols. But the total collaboration would be in front of our computer, our phone, whatever, on Sunday mornings, and worship as best we could together. And also what folks said about commitment to doing church.
Yeah.
Different kind. I remember folks, Kate talked to some folks where she had a part-time job deal with the idea of not getting together and hugging and everything like that Sunday mornings. We were committed to it too, but not that way.
So commitment and collaboration are, interesting to think about collaboration as binding myself to another person, which means I don't actually just get to move. We're going to collaborate on this, and that means you have some agency in it.
I just want to give a shout out to Robin, because when she sent out all of those readings for us, all the family units, and favorite Christmas trees, and we all just had a bit of it. And
Yeah.
Word church sharing all of
Yeah, Kate's giving a shout out to Robin, especially for that, specifically for that Christmas experience, that Advent experience of how creatively we bound ourselves to one another through a season when we couldn't do it in the old ways. Yeah, that's very helpful. It's interesting that I didn't mention this, but the obey comes from the Latin to hear, odire, as in audible. So hearing someone outside myself. Yeah. Do you have one more?
I had one more from our table. It wasn't mine, but it actually was an obedience to from Sherry to not just saying whatever I feel like saying, but to listening. So
Oh. Wow, yeah, Sherry said, obedience to not just say whatever I feel like saying, but actually listening. That's a form of obedience, to pull back on we could use more of that. What about y'all?
We talked about all of the above, but we also talked about the fact that this was uniquely a commitment to self and to others. So everything that we've committed to in terms of the masks and the vaccines and so on was uniquely selfish and giving at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, that really did. So personal discipline was also important for the sake of my neighbor, Madge is saying, that there was this back and forth to realize I need to be obedient to this practice, both for myself and for my neighbor. Anything over here?
Just personally, Rosie kept playing the piano.
Yeah. Continued
playing. About being parents, like we were around family a lot more, so we were parenting, kind of reconnecting with our responsibility to parent. And for Tim, it was parenting a college kid at home.
Piano lessons, parenting, kids of all ages. There was some obedience involved in there?
On both sides.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So let's think about conversion then. So the idea is also obedience and stability bring to mind these practices, these ongoing practices that put us in a place. But also the Benedictine said we need to have a heart that is open to transformation. That these certain forms of practice will put us in a place so that our hearts are actually soft enough. Hardened hearts was the Hebrew scripture term, that they can actually be transformed, because my heart does not want to be changed, not by you or by anybody or by God or anything. So take a couple minutes and think about about conversion. Where in your life and in Calvary's have you unexpectedly experienced conversions or something new, especially over the past year and a half? Something unexpected, something you didn't plan for perhaps. Could be very small, could be noticing something. See if there's what comes of that. I think of this in terms of the tree becoming a table. As much as the people who were tending to it tried to let the tree be itself, it transformed into this other object that will be used for other things, that's open-ended to imagine what will happen at that table, who knows. So where's conversion happened? Transformation.
And I think if you don't have somebody that's wrong, I'm going to church. When we get that three, I've only got two. Talking about, these are all the words.
Close off the thought you've got there, and then we'll glean from what you've discovered. How about conversion? Let's start with y'all. Where has conversion happened, or something you describe in those terms? Whit?
By virtue of the fact that over the past 18 months, stability and obedience, if you have followed that way of thinking with respect to all that's been put upon us, you either reject it or you accept it. And by virtue of accepting it and living it, that in itself is a form of conversion.
Living, say, what's it? Well, accepting and living it. Tell me what it is specifically.
The new way of life.
The new way of life that we've had to take up during the pandemic.
That's right.
There's either been rejection,
Or you
deny.
reject it, and you say it's just bull or whatever, or you accept it. You accept it as fact. You accept it as it's just the new culture, the new way we have to live. And in that respect, it's a form of conversion if you truly believe it and live it.
So living into a time of uncertainty and difficulty, there's a deep conversion that happens as we try to be faithful during that. It's not always pleasant. It's good to remember that conversion is not always a pleasant experience. That's why we resist it. Yeah. What else? Let's go over here this way. Y'all have one?
Tim said he's really enjoying growing tomatoes.
Growing tomatoes? Yeah, yeah.
For me, it was sort of learning new forms of personal spiritual formation, journaling, poetry, prayer.
New forms of spiritual practice, journaling, poetry, prayer that weren't a part of Dave's life prior in the same ways. Yeah, in the same ways. Yeah. No, those are conversions. What about y'all?
I think that my family and I really appreciate the Fred Rogers approach to life. Look for the good. And in the last year and a half, that's what my husband and I have had to do. Regardless of what's going on, we've decided, let's look for the good, just as Paul says, in all things.
Looking for the good.
Regardless of what's going on.
Looking. Yeah, so looking for the good is a conversion, a different way of looking because we're pretty accustomed to looking for what's wrong. What about y'all?
We talked about how sort of our perspective was converted because, new technology was helpful, but preferred to do it in person, but we really came to see how things could still be meaningful, it could still be a community. It was a different way of doing it. It was a conversion of thought and practice in many ways. And then we also talked about the daily offices and how, although those were in the prayer book and we sometimes did them, but we knew about them. This experience has converted some of our practices and helped us to see the usefulness in those things and the benefit.
That's helpful and makes sense. So it's a conversion that can happen when someone says, oh, the daily office is actually essential to me now. That was not the case prior. That kind of gets into where we see how these can lead back to other parts, so now this conversion happens and now it becomes a practice that leads stability in a new way perhaps. And then an obedience to saying, you know what, I'm going to say it even if I don't quite feel like it this morning. And how they all wind in and out of each other. It's a helpful way. Did y'all have one to add to that?
One of them that came through mine was, I hope everybody stands up and disagrees with me if they do. Paying
Discernment.
Working well.
You were converted into
Discern, making good choices, I would hope.
Mhm.
Interdependent behavior. You get that shot, wear your mask. Everybody else is counting on it. Calvary did not forget. We scrambled and found ways to continue to worship. Zoom classes for readings and the other stuff, the Baguette Brothers. We just get stuck out there.
So I heard Ted was saying an interdependence, converted into a very deep sense of interdependence during a time like this as we realized how much our lives were, both health-wise and spiritual practice-wise when it came to prayer and whatnot. We have some online?
We did. Edward Boardman talks about how it became impossible to plan ahead. We had to let go of being able to plan things in the future and become more flexible.
We were converted into seats of the pants people, whether we wanted to or not. That's really helpful, right? We had to learn new chops. We had to have put brackets around everything we did, right? We're going to plan for the best we can, and then that's also a good example of how conversion isn't just this sweetness and light shaft of light coming in on us. It's actually some fundamental way in which we are in the world has to shift, but it's necessary to making us whole. So helpful to hear your thoughts. And we'll just take a couple of minutes. I always, in these forums, like to at least at the end, make sure that anything's game if there's questions you had coming. But in this process of reflecting on your life, on Calvary's life, on an old tree becoming a table, any way in, as you think of these different aspects, any burning takeaways or questions or wonderings that aren't confined to those as we think about our life together going forward. Raymond.
Early in your presentation, you showed a picture of a community carrying a plank, which I assume now was a piece of potato.
Yeah.
At the time, I was really wondering what it was.
Yeah, the group of people carrying the plank initially when I said we're going to be more collaborative than just feeding the birds, they were carrying one of those planks, and it took that many people to carry it. Yeah, Ardell?
So my burning takeaway is that image, while we all, probably our motto from here on will be the Lord willing and the creek don't rise. We're going to do this work together.
Lord willing and the creek don't rise. Lord willing and the pandemic numbers and the infection rates don't rise. That's right. Yeah, Pat. The creek rose. That's right. The Lord was willing, the creek rose. Well, let me send you one of the most impactful, influential, interesting Benedictines of the last century, probably, was Joan Chittister. Many of you would know that name. And here's what I'll send us with, off into the fall. Hospitality, she says, means we take people into the space that is ourselves, our lives and our minds and our hearts and our work and our efforts. It is the way we come out of ourselves. It is the first step toward dismantling the barriers of the world. Hospitality is the way we turn a prejudiced world around, one heart at a time. Somehow going through the Benedictine way and hearing your pieces woven together in that brings Sister Joan's words alive, that actually personal practices, collective practices as a church, as Christians, on out into the world. This is how Christians have believed the world can be different. This is how the kingdom can be made known. It's not just navel-gazing and taking care of ourselves and becoming perfect. It really can change the way the world is put together and bring the kingdom. One more time. Hospitality means we take people into the space that is ourselves, our lives and our minds and our hearts and our work and our efforts. It's the way we come out of ourselves. It is the first step toward dismantling the barriers of the world. Hospitality is the way we turn a prejudiced world around, one heart at a time. Let's go do that. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thank you all.